Why, oh why do we hate Apple? Let's discuss. Hey there, friends on YouTube. My name's Jason, sometimes known as the JTL. This is Painfully Honest Tech. Tech's so honest it hurts. Hurts. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're not new to the channel, then thanks for coming back. And if you're here just because you hate Apple, I've got 5 reasons. 5 reasons. Count them, 5. That I think Apple is generally hated by those who hate Apple. And I am not myself 100% of the time an Apple hater. I am an Apple user. I have an iPhone 10 again. Okay? There's something about Apple that I like, but there are many things that tick me off. And so I'm going to go through 5 reasons why I think I get ticked off and why other people get ticked off. If you have more, then you can put them down in the comments and we can discuss. But be nice. Be nice. Won't you? Reason number 1. Arrogance. Ever since Apple was a tiny little company, they sort of took on the attitude of their founder, Steve Jobs. And his attitude was that, well, people don't know what they want until they want it. And to a certain degree, Steve Jobs was right. He created with Apple a bunch of products that no one else had considered. The iPod was the best example of the MP3 player that we ever had. The iPhone took the smartphone and made it better, and it just kept getting better and getting better. Now, the competition has caught up in many ways, but when it comes to things like the HomePod, they start to make claims, and a lot of times it starts in the marketing, and then it moves its way up through the ranks. If you've been watching my channel, you know I've been sort of ragging on the HomePod for a while. One of the things that really bothers me about the HomePod is it's not the best smart speaker out there. It sounds really good. It integrates well with the Apple ecosystem, but Apple has hamstrung it to the point where it's not really a product for everyone, and that's not really been Apple's way in the past. Apple has always wanted to create these really easy to use, I think Steve Jobs called it like making the computer sort of an appliance, like a blender. Something that was just easy to use that you could get into and get going. I have 2 Macs on my desk right here right now. I've got a 2015 MacBook Pro. I have an iMac from a long time ago. The original old iMac design. Anyway, these were things, I don't know if you're younger, you don't remember. If you're younger, you don't recall that building a PC used to suck. You used to have driver conflicts all the time. You couldn't get anything to work with anything else. You spent more time troubleshooting the PC that you built than you did using it. And while there were many diehard folks who did do that and loved doing it, the PCs that you could buy off the shelf weren't exactly all that great. And Apple offered a more simple option with once they came out with OS 9 and started to grow from there, the graphical user interface, WYSIWYG. WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. Once they came with that, then everything started to change. The personal computer market blew up, but Apple has always had this arrogance, and a lot of it has come through in their marketing, and now sometimes it feels to me like they're cutting off their own nose to spite their faces, like with the HomePod. The HomePod could be a great smart speaker open to everyone that wanted to use it, but if you don't have an iOS device, if you're not using Apple Music, you have a subpar experience, and I just don't think that's acceptable. That is arrogant. Price to performance. There was once a day when Apple computers were super, super expensive, more expensive than anything else, and they still are, for that matter. But what you knew was you were buying a machine that was solidly built, that was going to last for 3 times, if not more, longer than its PC counterpart. And in recent years, both with their mobile devices and with their computer products, I found that the quality control with Apple has not been as good. They're still making solid products, but the quality control is just not there. Case in point, my iMac 27-inch. I got the full-size Bluetooth keyboard, the Magic keyboard. That's another reason why people hate Apple. They use the word magic and magical to describe everything, and they sound like douchebags when they do it. Okay? So, price to performance. You pay more, but it lasts longer. It's built more solidly, and you can generally count on it to be there when you need it to be. But my iMac, I got the big Magic keyboard, I got the trackpad, and I can't tell you in the few months that I've had it how many times I've sat down and just needed to get working, and I couldn't get the keyboard and trackpad to connect. I had tried turning them off. Sometimes I had to restart the computer. There used to be a time when I never had to restart any Apple product. There used to be a time when Macs were so rock solid, they just worked, and that was actually part of the marketing, was they just work. And that was a direct shot at the PC market, which sometimes didn't just work. You had to work with them quite a bit to get them to work. There have been many people complaining about iOS 11. There have been many people complaining about general build quality problems throughout their products. The HomePod leaves rings on some furniture with its rubber, how it's constituted. I don't know exactly what it is. So Apple has had some quality control issues lately. And when you're asking people to pay basically a third more for your product than anybody else is charging for it, then you need to have the quality control that makes it worthwhile. Now, Apple customer support, I've always had a good experience with, etc., but price to performance ratio and how that has started to go downhill is number 2 reason why I think it's become more in vogue to hate Apple. Number 3, the closed ecosystem is sort of the golden handcuffs of Apple. If you are an Apple customer, if you have Apple devices up the yin-yang, if you go from AirPods to HomePods to iMacs to MacBooks to MacBook Pros to iPhones and everything else in between, if you've got all that, they do a fantastic job of integrating their products so that they all work seamlessly together. And it's not always been the greatest. It's always worked better in theory than in practice. But of the recent years, stuff like AirDrop is really, really an impressive technology. I love having stuff on my phone that I can then just send straight over to my computer. It's magical. But for others who might want to be in the Mac world, but they don't want to totally invest in the Mac ecosystem, the Apple ecosystem, then they get a lesser experience than they would otherwise. And that to me is it's a little, again, arrogant and unfair to those who want to have a more widespread experience with their electronic devices. Another problem with the closed ecosystem, and most people talk about this when it comes to iOS, is that iOS works the way Apple wants it to work. There's virtually no customizability in iOS. Beyond a certain point, you can put your things in your little icons in folders, so you could move them around, but always in a grid system. It just works the way Apple wants it to work. And they can do that because they don't have to think about being on 1,000 different phones. But there are times when you wish iOS would do more and it doesn't. Like, say for the iPad, they keep saying it's a computer, but yet it doesn't have the ability to use a mouse. We're not at the place where 100% of our fingers are just going to do everything that we want. So if they want to call it a computer, then they gotta give us better mouse support, better professional support, etc., etc. And I think that a lot of people just really they just really rankle at that closed ecosystem, and that Apple wants you to buy all their stuff at roughly 1/3 more than what everything else costs to get the best experience out of their products. And for a lot of people out there, this is what makes them the most mad. And I get it, because with PCs you can build them to your own spec. With Microsoft, it's always been a cross-product platform, and Android is much the same way. It's funny because Apple was in a big war with Microsoft. Who would gain primacy in the computer operating system world? Well, it's the same thing now with Android and Apple. Android is open source. Android can do all these things. Apple is very closed and can do the things that Apple says you can do with it with iOS. And so Apple's fighting the same battle that they fought in the 90s here in the 2000 aughts and tens. And I guess that's the way it's always going to be. Some people want to create a customer experience. Some people want their customers to create their own experience. And so the closed ecosystem is one of the things that really ticks people off. Number 4. I can't think to call this anything other than just sort of straight up shadiness. The easy thing to think about is the batteries with the older iPhones and how they were being slowed down if the battery had degraded to a certain point, and they didn't tell the consumer that they were doing that. On one hand, you can say, well, they're doing a service to the consumer. If their batteries are weaker, then they don't want them to shut off prematurely, which is what was happening. So they integrated some stuff into the operating system that will allow the battery to last longer because the operating system is slowing down the processes. But the thing is, if you don't tell the consumer that you're doing that and what value you're adding to their older product, then it's really, really easy to think, they didn't tell us about this for however long they were doing it, and they were doing it. And there were probably plenty of people out there who bought a new iPhone because they were like, well, my old iPhone, now that the new one's out, my old iPhone is just too slow. And that, if that's the case, if it was kind of the gray area there where Apple's doing this thing and they can say it's for a good reason, but in reality, it's to sell more iPhones, just totally shady, and no reason for a company of the size and quality of Apple to do that. Another thing, I'm not super versed in all of this, so I'm not going to talk about it in detail, but things like tax dodging and basically putting up nets around your factory buildings so the Chinese folks who are working there aren't able to kill themselves by jumping off the roof. There's just been a lot of stuff like that over the years that has come out. But when I hear things like this, it sort of makes me feel a little weird. It's kind of shady. And for a company that does as well as Apple, I don't see why the subterfuge has to exist. 5. I left this one for last because I think it is the reason why people who hate Apple the way they do. It has a lot to do with their success. Back in the 90s, Microsoft was the huge company that Apple had to, David versus Goliath thing. As the 90s came around to an end, Apple had released the iMac. Microsoft had Windows Vista, I think, around that time. It was not a good operating system. Apple came out on top of that. But before that time, Apple was the product for creative people. Apple was the product for people who wanted to think differently. Apple was the underdog product, and people loved them for that. Just like they love Android and Android devices now in much the same way. There is this thought that Apple is the big monolithic company that everybody wants to best. Apple is Goliath now, and everybody else is David. And some people just like to root for the underdog. It's hard for me to say that Android operating system is the underdog. I mean, Google, the parent company that created Android, is huge, equally as huge as Apple, or at least comparably so. There are more Android phones in the world by far than there are iOS phones, right? Now people hate them for their success, and they look for reasons why they are starting to fail. I've done it myself. And I do it for a couple of different reasons. One reason is that I am worried that a company that I have loved since the early 90s has sort of jumped the shark and turned into Microsoft instead of Apple of days gone by. I don't want that to happen. I don't know that there's any way to stop it from happening. They have left their creative partners behind, and they've become more of a lifestyle company where they have diversified to the point that their products have become lifestyle accessories as opposed to useful, powerful machines that could get stuff done. Now, that doesn't mean the products have actually changed all that much at all. The MacBook Pros, there is no Mac Pro right now. You could buy the trash can, but why would you do that? There's the iMac Pro, but it's still not modular, which professional use, you really want to have modularity. The old Mac Pros, I've got one sitting right back there. I've got 3 Macs around me right now. The old Mac Pros were modular, and you could get in there, and you could work on them, and you could upgrade them, and they were your professional companion. There's still plenty of recording studios out there in the world that use old cheese grater Mac Pros because they don't want to upgrade to some non-modular product. It's not a big deal for some people, but that's it. I think a lot of people, Apple has been a victim of their success. And as such, they have kind of turned off some of their old school customers, and they have alienated a lot of people who maybe they just want to root for the underdog. Maybe they just see Apple as sort of the nasty old grandpa that just takes all the good stuff for themselves. I don't know. But those are my 5. Arrogance, price to performance, closed ecosystem, shadiness, and their success. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Did I miss anything? Do you disagree with me? I'm sure you'll be happy to tell me about it. Thanks for watching this video. I just want to kind of do a little commentary here. I really do appreciate you stopping by. If you are new here and if you've made it to this point in the video, then maybe you want to like and subscribe and do all those things and bell notify yourself so you can come back and see more Painfully Honest Tech. I'd really appreciate it. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate every single one of you being here. My name's Jason, sometimes known as the JTL. This is Painfully Honest Tech. Tech so honest it hurts. Until the next time, I'm out.